Savior, my soul magnifies the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God. My soul magnifies the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God. My Savior, my soul magnifies the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God. My soul magnifies the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God. My Savior, my soul magnifies the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God. My soul magnifies the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God. My Savior, my soul magnifies.
Or visiting us via the internet. Last Sunday there was some discussion that I had after last Sunday's lesson concerning if the apostles were feared, then how could they be effective in their teaching? So I'm going to recover just a couple of things from last Sunday to show you that that was definitely not a problem. One of the phrases that we covered was "and great fear." Now the word great here can be qualitative or quantitative. Qualitative would indicate the intensity of the fear. In other words, the fear was so great that it caused mass hysteria or freezing people in their tracks when they saw the apostles, or totally break down and cry. I don't believe this is what was implied by the use of the word great here. The people are not hiding in their homes, and they're not scared to go out and actually meet the apostles. In fact, just the opposite. The apostles are drawing larger and larger crowds at this particular point in time from people who are wanting to witness the power of God, something they haven't seen in over 400 years. So I believe the word is quantitatively used. In other words, the fear itself was just out of a healthy respect for the power the apostles wielded. Yet this respect was held by everyone and anyone who heard of the death of Ananias and Sapphira. Having one death inside the temple during prayer hour when the place is packed would catch the attention of a vast number of Jews. However, hearing about another death that happened just shortly prior to that one, and in the very same place, both very suspicious manner, i.e. from an act from God, and both being in front of Peter, with an exclamation or explanation afterwards that indicated that they were deceitful and that the apostles knew what they were thinking at the time. I would imagine that the majority of Jerusalem itself knew about this particular event shortly afterwards. Therefore, the fear was so great, everyone had it. Not that it was qualitative. It was something that froze people up. The next phrase, none of the rest dared join them. The Greek word here for rest is loipos. 55% of the time it means the remainder, 25% the remaining, and 15% the last part of. So roughly 95% of the time it indicates a different part of the original whole group. I had indicated the original part of the whole group was just the apostles, so everyone else, again, it indicates quantitatively a large group of people had this fear. And also the Greek word used here for join is koilo, and it has two meanings to it. Number one, to attach oneself to or to cling on to, and that is not a reference to Star Trek. It means to physically cling on to. Okay, they didn't dare join themselves to the apostles' group. In other words, no one is trying to make the apostles their BFFs, best friends forever. They just don't want to get that close to the apostles. But this does not mean that no one wants to associate with the apostles or be around them when they are doing all these fantastic miracles. Being the only group that is wielding such healing power, everyone wants to be around them, just not to join with them. The concern was that the apostles were doing all of these great miracles, but no one was sticking around to see them. And again, nothing is further from the truth. Everyone is watching these miracles, but essentially from just a safer distance. And the last phrase, the people held them in high esteem. This kind of explains, again, the fear that we're talking about. The word used for high esteem indicates to exalt, glorify, or magnify others over yourself. We might do this ourselves, let's say in the front of the Queen Mother, if she were to come up in our presence. And we would refrain from going up to her and giving her a high five or saying, hey, did you see the Seminole game last night, or putting our arm around and hugging her. We have enough fear or respect for her not to do those things. So that's the kind of fear that we're talking about that these people had towards the apostles. Try to clear that up. Next thing is we're going to get into Acts chapter 5, verses 15 through 16, and it says, for that they even carried out the sick into the streets and laid them on cots and mats, that as Peter came by, at least his shadow might fall on some of them. The people also gathered from the towns around Jerusalem, bringing in the sick from those and those afflicted with unclean spirits, and they were all healed. So the first phrase here is, so that they even carried out the sick into the streets. We already covered what so that means, and we used the illustration from the NIV and the New American Standard Bible, so I'm not going to cover that. They are not bringing the sick out directly to the apostles and saying, hey, could you heal somebody for me? In other words, they don't want to get close enough to ask the apostles to do them a favor in healing their sick. So they are just carrying them out and leaving them in hopes that his shadow. And the verb tense here, to carry out, implies a continuous action being done. We're talking about days, weeks, and even months of this going on at the time. The word street carries the connotation of a wide avenue and opposed to a narrow lane or alley. And the apostles now are taking their sermons to larger crowds, larger streets, and they're going out into Jerusalem. Okay, the church has been established. We just read about that. Now the first part of the Great Commission has commenced. So they're taking their sermons now out of the temple. They're going out into the streets. We need to understand that. Lay them on cots and mats. The cots represents the Greek word klinarion, which speaks of a bed or a couch that one would use to recline in order to eat at a meal. That's the ones that you would find the more rich Jews would be in, or the local Jews would be in. And the word mats here is krabatos. This speaks of a camping bed or a smaller pallet or mattress, such as either the poor would be on or all of those that are coming in from the outlying cities, for sure, they would be on. The next phrase says that as Peter came by, at least his shadow might fall on some of them. The apostles have just finished creating the church and are now taking their first step into the Great Commission. As such, they are confined to Jerusalem. We will see them later going out and doing the same exact things throughout Judea. For this reason, though, that they're confined here because of the Great Commission, the people outside of Jerusalem are having to bring their sick into Jerusalem. The apostles are still restricted and aren't going out there yet. So we see the first part of the Great Commission going on here. We know that Peter was given the keys to the kingdom, and as such, he was the one in charge to establish Jesus' church, and we read a thing on that. The local Jews, up to this point in time, that's pretty much what they've been doing, is establishing the church. So the local Jews would naturally see Peter as the leader of the apostles because of this, and therefore they would carry their sick initially to just Peter as mentioned here, until they witnessed the other apostles going out and doing the same thing. So Peter was kind of in charge of doing the church, but now that the apostles are going out in the Great Commission, 2 by 2, each and everyone's doing their own thing. They're all doing miracles. So that's kind of what I'm thinking here. And essentially, they placed their sick so that Peter's shadow might just touch them. In ancient times and in the different people that lived during this time, the shadow was subject to a lot of superstitions, and they believed that it represented the person's power or his persona, and therefore to literally be an extension from that person. Now the question is, though, were any of the people healed in that manner, i.e. when Peter's shadow went across from them? And essentially, in my opinion, yes. If that were the case, otherwise why keep doing it on a continuous basis as they're doing it? Or, for that matter, if it didn't work, why were people still bringing the sick in from miles away? So we know that miracles are possible and that the word written in the Gospels will indicate some general laws concerning miracles. So we find nothing here, as far as Peter's shadow healing someone, anything that would be contrary that we find in the Gospels. Christ healed sometimes with only a single word, without any physical contact or his shadow contacting them in any way. But as to the reason why they were waiting for the shadow might be explained again by the previous verse, i.e. they're just a little bit scared to go up to them and confront them and ask them to heal their people. So especially in the case of Peter, who again read people's minds and has no problems confronting people with their sin. So they did the only thing available. They stayed in the background and they hoped that the shadow would fall upon their sick friends. And then the same analogy again we will see happen to the lady that touched Jesus' hem, except it's a little worse case there. Here they're just respectful of the apostles and kind of shy. They don't want to intrude. However, the lady that touched Jesus' hem, she had been unclean for 12 years. She was amongst a crowd without shouting, unclean. And plus, holy people or holy men, including priests, were not allowed to let themselves become unclean unless it was their immediate family. And that would be the only exception. And for someone to go up to a priest or a holy man and make them unclean by touching them, they would immediately be dragged out of the city and stoned to death. So in her case, it was a lot more fear. Now, I was going to show a couple of verses. Here's Matthew 8, chapter 13, and it talks about the centurion. Again, here, Jesus never touched the person. And then we have here, when he arrives back, the father knew that the hour in which Jesus had said to him, "Your son will live." Again, he knew that the healing happened while he was away talking to Jesus. Again, no touching, no shadow. So there's no problem with any of this. We also have some that do have a medium in between, i.e. here's where the hem was touched, and it was Jesus' hem that healed her amongst instantly touching it. We also have the situation here where Jesus put saliva and mud and put it on the eyes, and he washed it off, and he was healed. Again, a medium was used. And then we also have this one in Acts chapter 19. And it says, "And God was doing extraordinary miracles by the hands of Paul, so that even handkerchiefs or aprons that had touched his skin were carried away to the sick, and their disease left them, and the evil spirits came out of them." So here we even see sometimes it's just mediums with no attachment to the person whatsoever. Probably this was done without Paul's knowledge, but yet this at one time had touched his skin, whereas Peter's shadow is always touching him. So that brings us to the next phrase here. The people also gathered from the towns and around Jerusalem. Again, we see the people as indicating the same thing from Acts chapter 4. It's the Jewish nation, except this is the Jewish nation that is outside of Jerusalem here. The word gather points to, again, a continuous action over a period of time. Attracted by the news of healing miracles, they are continually coming in from other towns. In just a few words here, Luke has covered a period of probably about several months. Multitudes are coming in from neighboring cities: Hebron, Bethlehem, Emmaus, Jericho, Lydda, Joppa. And even though we will see apostles later on in Acts chapter 9 going out into those very same areas, still teaching, still healing people, they are right now beginning the Great Commission. Therefore, they are confined as of yet into Jerusalem. So everyone's having to bring the people to them. However, their reputation and the knowledge of Christ is, in fact, going out from Jerusalem via these sick people being healed. Therefore, it is preceding them when they go out and do the second part of the Great Commission. So in my opinion, the apostles would heal any and everyone because the emphasis is upon being a sign of their teachings as coming from God. They were teaching to the Jewish nation about their own God that they normally worship, however, via his new covenant for them through the resurrection of Jesus our Lord. But it will be this mass migration of Jewish people coming into Jerusalem to be healed, and most likely a good portion of them saved, that is about to cause the next problem or event that we see. The Pharisees, they don't mind the apostles are teaching the resurrection of Jesus because that helps strengthen their belief over that of the Sadducees. However, they just wish they would stop blaming the Pharisees for killing Jesus. On the other hand, the Sadducees are livid at this time because the apostles are teaching directly against their particular belief. Now, if there is only one sick person to be healed, how many miracles are the apostles going to do? Well, probably one miracle, because there's only one sick person to heal. But if you have hundreds, maybe even thousands of people coming into the city now, how many miracles do you think are being done? A whole bunch. They normally teach in connection with these particular miracles. So how much teaching is now going on? A whole bunch. So we've gone from being in the temple now we're going out into the broader streets doing Jerusalem, the first part of the Great Commission, and we've got teaching galore. So that's what's causing this next event here. And it says, bringing the sick and those afflicted with unclean spirits. Here we see two categories of ailments to those of this time. Afflictions of an unclean spirit. They were common enough to be considered just another kind of ailment back in those days. In fact, all ailments were attributed to either sin or some kind of unclean spirit. However, there is a huge difference between the two in our day and age now. This is important to note in a time when we have certain people on TV trying to attribute all sickness to demon possession or just to demons by themselves. During this time in history, demons and unclean spirits have free reign over mankind to possess them. In our situation, they have been restricted, thankfully. So we don't have to deal with those kinds of problems or ailments because of demons. And they were all healed. This appears to be an all-inclusive statement here. Both those lining the streets and those being brought in from the neighborhoods or neighboring cities, and also those who were just regularly sick or those who had unclean spirits. It didn't make any difference. All were being healed. It is significant that after Pentecost, the apostles were successful in every single case they tried to heal, unlike the faith healers that you may see of today. The apostles never had to make any kind of excuse for not being able to heal someone. Now, there were signs and wonders, and the benefit for all to be seen by them to indicate essentially that God is at work here. And in those direct healings, i.e., faith was required by the one doing the healing. In other words, if it was a direct healing where an apostle went up to someone, it would require faith on the apostle's side in order to achieve that healing, not necessarily the person receiving the healing. Because we have several verses in the Bible prior to this, in the Gospels, where Jesus rebuked his apostles for not having enough faith in order to cast demons out or to do certain miracles. But now Luke is trying to tell us there is no lack of faith amongst the apostles. All and everyone is being healed here. So that brings us to Acts chapter 5, verses 17 and 18. And it says, "But the high priest rose up, and all who were with him," that is, the party of the Sadducees, "and filled with jealousy, they arrested the apostles and put them in public prison." And it says, "But the high priest rose up." Does this talk about Annas, or does this talk about Caiaphas? Both would have been Sadducees. Now, commentators are kind of split on this. However, we'll see a little more of them leaning towards Annas, which, again, I believe is correct. According to history, let me give you a little history about these guys. They are both running as high priests at this particular point in time. Annas was initially assigned this position by the Romans prior to where we are in history right now. However, because of his participation as a Roman leader, because that was a Roman leader position, he participated in making war and having fights with the Samaritans, and therefore he is officially going against Roman rule of making dissidents amongst their people. So that's a no-no, and he was doing that. He was officially fired from that position and was taken to Rome to go to trial for his wrongdoings. However, during that particular point in time, Caiaphas has now been officially given this position by the Roman government. So now he has the job. However, Annas managed to escape punishment from his trial back in Rome because of his connections and his influence among certain key Roman officials, and he was allowed to return back to Jerusalem. Not to take over the job, but he was just free. It is because of this connection and influence that he had with Romans, especially in this area, that the Jews would claim him as their high priest instead of Caiaphas. Now, if you remember, during this time frame, Tiberius has isolated himself. The local Roman rulers are doing all kinds of atrocities and bad things to the Jewish nation at this point in time. The Jews need all the influence right now that they can get. That's why they're clinging on to Ananias for their high priest. Caiaphas is just someone that has been assigned the duty. So both are ruling at this time. Ananias with his power, influence, and key Roman officials, and Caiaphas as an official puppet in order to present it to the legal people. Therefore, any type of questionable behavior at this point in time, in my opinion, would normally be done by Annas and not Caiaphas. Now, this is the third run-in that the apostles are going to have with the Sanhedrin. It all started back in Acts chapter 4, and back then it says they first met the Sanhedrin when Peter and John were initially arrested. It was for the cause of a disturbance within the temple under the nose of the Romans again. Remember, we said they're normally in the northeast corner. That's right where the Tower of Antonio, the Romans are always looking at what the Christians are doing. They caused a commotion. This would upset the Sadducees. The Sadducees were the ones that thought They were the in-between, or the go-between, between Roman rule and Jewish nation. They were fighting to protect the nation. The Pharisees were more in teaching traditions of their fathers. So the Sadducees got really upset because a disruption in the temple was done right under the nose of the Romans. So during that first meeting, it doesn't say any name of a high priest that officiated there. However, we will see both Annas and Caiaphas were at the official trial the next day, which is essentially the second time that they are before the Sanhedrin. So now we're getting ready to come up to the third time that we're coming up before the Sanhedrin. And the phrase says, the high priest rose up. This appears to be an idiom, which means he began active opposition against the apostles. The New Revised Standard Version actually says that he took action, or he is taking action at this time. So it says, and all who were with him, that is, the party of the Sadducees. The phrase, all who were with him, is explained or defined by the words within the parentheses that come immediately behind it. This indicates that only the Sadducee party is behind this particular action against the apostles at this time. They were the ones who also ordered the first arrest, if you remember, Acts chapter 4. This implies that the Pharisee party has not taken any action against the apostles at this time, nor have they planned to at this time. Now, in my opinion, they have no knowledge of this action being taken against the apostles by the Sadducees. It is all being coordinated by the high priest and the Sadducee party. Now remember, we said the Pharisees don't mind them teaching because it bolsters their faith. But again, the Sadducees are the ones that are livid because the apostles are teaching directly against their belief. The only thing that allows the Jewish nation to have its own religion at this point in time is the fear of the power of the Jewish God. The long history of God's power. The Romans allowed the Jews as the only nation in their empire to have their own religion. Everyone else had to accept the Roman religion. Therefore, at this point in time, the Sadducees, who think they're the go-between or they're the protector of the Jewish nation, have been putting on fake demonstrations to impress upon the Roman leaders that God's power is not only still with them, but they are in control of God's power. However, with all of the miracles that are now going on, it's really apparent that these 12 men out in the streets have got God's power. They are doing it numerous times every day. So the Sadducees are seeing this as we're losing our control over God's power in the face of the Romans. So the word party here, or sect, if you have that translation, is the Greek word hairesis, which means something one chooses to do or one chooses to believe. So it came to mean a party to which one belongs to by choice. And it says here, and filled with jealousy. Now, if you have an older Bible, it may say that they are filled with zeal. The word used here, 45% of the time, it can mean zeal. 55% it can mean jealousy. However, you will see that all of the newer translations have switched over to jealousy, and except for the New King James Version, 1900 and beyond, and it uses the word indignation. So we might see this jealousy in three different areas. Number one, they were jealously guarding their own beliefs from the attacks of the apostles. The Sadducees don't believe in such things such as life after death, or heaven, or angels. They believe that Jerusalem is actually the heaven that God gave them on earth, and that was it. Secondly, they are jealously guarding their authority over their own people. If you remember correctly, the apostles at this point in time, at least Peter and John, have been told, do not preach in the name of Jesus. And what do we see now? Well, we see them out in the biggest streets in Jerusalem in mass quantities teaching in the name of Jesus. So it shows little regards towards their authority, and they directly disobey this solemn injunction that they placed upon, at least Peter and John, in teaching and preaching in the name of Jesus. Thirdly, they are jealously guarding their demonstrations to the Romans that only they can control God's power. The apostles are showing great power amongst the people with apparent ease and assurance. So, whereas they have been going to great effort to impress the Romans for just single fake demonstrations periodically, now miracles are daily. But of note here is jealousy is inspired not by the love of their own cause, but rather by the hate for those which triumph over their cause. We will also see this jealousy is not focused just upon Peter and John now, who are the only two that were given the injunction not to teach or preach, but it is going to be on all the apostles at this point in time. And it says they arrested the apostles. The word used here indicates the laying on of hands, i.e., it's a rough kind of arrest. It's not a pretty arrest. We may say they grabbed him by the nape of the neck and they threw him in jail. All 12 will be involved in this arrest, as we will see later in verse 29. The Sadducees are not messing around at this point in time. The fact that all 12 are being arrested at this same, with the use of this same word here, indicates that they probably were all together as one group and come together in order for the arrest. Therefore, some scholars tend to think that this was done late in the evening, i.e., there is evidence to indicate this. Plus, they wouldn't want to do it in front of the numerous Jews who have gone all this distance to bring in their sick, only to have their own rulers arrest the apostles that would give their sick the only chance of being healed. They also wouldn't do that for all of the Jews who are constantly following them just to see the power of God and to listen to the message that they are speaking. And at this point in time, remember, we have probably 15,000 Christians at least in the church. They wouldn't want to do them in front of all of those people. In fact, if you were to read on, remember their decision in Acts chapter 4? It was kind of persuaded or swayed because of the public that was around them at that trial. And if you read further on, when they finally find that they're not in prison and they send the guards to go get them, the guards don't lay hands on them there either. They were afraid that a riot, an all-out riot, would happen if they laid hands on them in a rough manner there. But for some reason, they do it here. They get away with laying with rough hands on the apostles. So again, it indicates if they're afraid of a riot in chapter 4, and if they're afraid of a riot just after this, in doing that, how do we have it happening here? Again, secrecy. Plus, some of the early fathers evidently wrote in the margin of their Bibles that this was done at night. The way we see that is when we recopy Bibles, a lot of times the notes on the side wind up getting incorporated into the body. And if you look at the Codex Beeza, which is one of the famous old Bibles that we have, it has an extra verse right here indicating that the rulers went to their own homes after they had arrested them, again indicating a late evening or night arrest was what was incurred at this point in time. There are other indications that we will show that all of this is being done under secrecy. And put them in public prison. We have seen the word prison here before in chapter 4. They put Peter and John into prison prior to their trial. But this is not like the prisons that you think of today. It is a holding place for those scheduled for a trial. It is a one-day only type of holding, a 24-hour holding, and it is to ensure that all the parties are available for the trial. It gives a 24-hour cool-down period, plus all of their trials were required to be held publicly. It gave 24 hours after they posted who was going to have the trial tomorrow. It gave everyone 24 hours to prepare themselves in order to be at that trial. So that's the holding prison that we see there. However, here we see the word public is placed in front of it. The Mosaical law did not have any provisions for a prison being used as a form of punishment. The only holding place within the law was in fact the one as mentioned in Acts chapter 4, a 24-hour holding prior to a trial. However, all the surrounding nations did use prisons for the purpose of punishment. And it wasn't until the time of the Jewish kings did the Jewish nation actually start putting people into prison. This happens to Jeremiah, and we'll try to cover that in just a little bit. But we find that in Jeremiah chapter 37, it would appear that this happened for the first time, and it uses imprisonment by the Jewish nation. And essentially it was at the wish of the king in this case. In our case, it would be the Sanhedrin or the court. But as a punishment, it required a trial. Yet this was considered a punishment and needed to be assigned by a trial. In our case, the apostles haven't been assigned punishment yet by trial. So this is highly irregular for them to be put in a public prison at this point in time. Now, because it says public, a lot of scholars say, well, this is to show the rest of the people that they have power. Well, however, in this day and time, prisons are in dungeons and cellars down below. Prisons with the iron bars that you can see through and publicly see the prisoners, those won't come for hundreds of years later. That's out of the question. In fact, there's a little thing that says, away from the public I can't even remember it, but essentially it says prisons were made to lock people away from public because they didn't want the public to see them, lock them into a dungeon where they would never see the day of light, put them in some place that was easily to control by only one access, i.e. maybe one door, main door. And it was a place to where the rulers and the kings could say, essentially, I didn't kill him, I just put him in prison. The fact that he starved to death, that was his own fault. You know, that's kind of what they're saying here. So that is essentially why we're putting people in prisons. So for this to be a show, i.e. they're put in prison, and if our information is correct about it being at night, if you're put in prison at night and taken out the next morning for trial, there would have been no one there to see it to begin with. So trying to say this is for any kind of show, it just doesn't fit the context that we have here. To show that it is more severe way of handling, well, yeah, but again, it kind of loses its severity if you think of they're only going to be there overnight. So that doesn't context. So the thing that I think that we have here is they were put here in order to stash them away so the public wouldn't know where they were. They were arrested at night, or they were arrested away from their friends because we know they used laying hands on them. And then they were immediately carried to a public prison, a place where the public has no idea what's going on inside that prison. All of this is going to be done under closed doors, shall we say. So I believe the word public is used here to indicate that they were in fact being held in a public prison instead of a normal place for a trial. In that way, no one would know where in prison they would be. No one would know that a trial is even coming up. And essentially, the Sadducees are keeping everything secret so no one knows about it. We will also see other information about this secrecy coming up. Here about Jeremiah, essentially the main thing I want to show here is Jeremiah, and the officials were enraged at Jeremiah, and they beat him and imprisoned him in the house of Jonathan, the secretary, for it had been made a prison. So they don't even have, at this time of the kings, an actual prison. They have just taken someone's house, made it into a makeshift prison, and they are using it. And it talks about a dungeon cells, i.e. that's where you put them as low as you can get them down underneath the ground. In verse 18, Jeremiah said to the king, "What wrong have I done to you or your servants or this people that you have put me in prison?" I.e., Jeremiah is saying two things. Number one, our law doesn't say you can put me in prison. And number two, you haven't tried me. Verse 20 says, "So hear, please, O Lord, O my Lord the king, let my humble plea come before you, and do not send me back to the house of Jonathan the secretary, lest I die." Essentially, he knows if he goes back to that house locked away underneath the floors, that's it. He's a goner. And then we see here in 21, the king finally gives orders to put him with the court of the guard, so at least there is constant supervision there, and at least a loaf of bread was given him daily to keep him from dying outright. So like all the other prisons that we see at this time frame, prisoners are given bread and water to eat, and they're locked away until they die. That's pretty much it. So Acts chapter 5, verses 19 and 20 says, "During the night an angel of the Lord opened the prison door and brought them out and said, 'Go and stand in the temple and speak to the people all the words of the life.'" The first phrase says, "But during the night." Again, if we're correct about the rest that just happened and that it was at night and they're trying to keep this thing under guards, just as the Sadducees snuck out the apostles in the dead of the night and kept them away from all of the following that they have, God has snuck them out at night from the Sadducees in the same way. And the interesting thing is the next phrase, "An angel of the Lord." So if the Sadducees are trying to show the apostles they mean business, God is telling them that he doesn't care about their business or their agenda. It won't affect the spreading of God's word in one least bit. This also became the key point of their trial. If you remember, Gamaliel later on in his speech will say, "If this is of God, there is nothing we can do to stop it." So that's the whole thing. They're trying to lock them away, quickly get rid of them. God's not letting them do that. And the Pharisees are saying, "Hey, if this is from God, yeah, that's the way it's going to be. There's nothing you can do about it." Knowing that the Sadducees had guards on the jail and that they still escaped without a single alarm or having even been seen to escape, that would be a huge embarrassment. And that can only be an act of God. And the Sadducees were not only powerless to prevent it, but later would be totally humiliated by it, because the apostles were released by the one thing the Sadducees didn't even believe existed, an angel. Which brings us up to the next one. I'm ahead of myself, I'm sorry. An angel of the Lord. The release, according to Luke, was obviously supernatural. An angel is the one that did this, which, again, the Sadducees denied even existed. It is the one thing that could have released them that would be more of a slap in the face than anything else. Now, there are historians at this point in time that say, well, we don't believe in the supernatural stuff in the Bible, and therefore this is obviously a zealous follower that let him out. Again, my opinion on that one is that totally impinges on the trustworthiness of the Scriptures, and therefore its inspiration, and in my opinion, should be totally rejected. Opened the prison doors and brought them out. Here again, evidently the prison had prison doors. Again, not the doors that with the iron bars that you can see through. doors that were closed, maybe have a little bitty trap at the top or the bottom where you could slide food in, but pretty much locked away without seeing the day of light of day. Otherwise, they wouldn't have needed an angel to do this. However, some critics sneer at this particular part of Acts, saying, what good was such a deliverance as this when the apostles are just going to be arrested again in the morning? They attempt to show this as being folly, foolishness, that God didn't really think this through or that he made a mistake. However, the answer to such charges is not hard to see. God is making a point here to the Sadducees. Such a release would serve to rebuke and actually slap in the face the Sadducees, not to mention totally embarrass them before the Romans when they finally hear of what's going on. It would also help increase the esteem in which the people held the apostles and give extra strength to the teachings over those of their leaders, and convince them all the more of God's power, his presence, and his providential care of his own over that they are seeing out of their own leaders, because locking them up in a public prison is totally against the law. Their leaders are going way against the law in order to try to get rid of the apostles, whereas if they had seen Ananias and Sapphira's handling of God in their righteous judgment, it was quick, it was swift, and it was by the law. So they're seeing their leadership corrupt. God's leadership is within the law and looks good. And that's it. Okay, I'm not going to be able to teach any more on this subject here, but let me just say one thing. This whole thing is really a fascinating story of intrigue, where when the Sadducees finally get ready to bring out the apostles, it's like, okay, they're not here. The angel, if you remember, is going to tell them to go into the temple and preach. Where have we said that they're preaching right now? They started the Great Commission. They're out in Jerusalem. Why would the angel tell them to go all the way back into the temple and preach there again? And you will find via the maps, the charts, and everything else, that is the one and only place that they could be, where everyone could go into the indoor Sanhedrin court and would never see them. Yet they're still right where they normally were. You'll also see that the Sadducees had to call this hearing together. It wasn't scheduled. Why wasn't it scheduled? Because they weren't put in the normal holding cell. It wasn't posted. Therefore, the Sadducees had to call it together. And all the people that were coming in from their homes in order to do this, if the apostles were still in the streets of Jerusalem doing this, they would have passed them and known. But the angel told them, nope, I want you to go back in the temple. I've got you all in one group. When they do arrest you, you will be there together. You can walk right over because it's going to be a little bit away. And it's, again, going to be a slap in the face that right in their own backyard is where the apostles are, and they had no idea. So read the rest of that, and I think you'll find it a fascinating read. That's all I've got.